Between the years 2000 and 2005, more journalists were murdered in the Philippines than anywhere else in the world, even Iraq. The Committee for the Protection of Journalists says during the Arroyo administration, 32 journalists have been murdered, far more even than under the military dictatorship of Ferdinand Marcos. But that's only the tip of the iceberg. Human rights groups in and outside the Philippines agree that politically linked murders are happening at a frightening rate. Some estimate more than 800 in recent years. I'm Teymoor Nabili, and on this edition of 101 East, we ask, is the Arroyo government turning a blind eye to politically motivated murder? The Philippines president says she is determined to put an end to political violence. Some members of her government say most of the murders are being committed by communists killing each other, and the army argues that communist and Islamic insurgencies need to be defeated militarily. Meanwhile, families of victims say they just want justice. Marga Ortigas reports from Manila.
Farmer Gregorio Galicio and his partner Virginia prepare for another difficult day. They're a long way from home, hiding in a safe house with their youngest child. They've had to leave 2 other children with relatives. Hoping to find justice for their eldest, they're making their story public.
And also it's
At a news conference, Gregorio holds a photo of his 9-year-old daughter, Grecil, killed just a few weeks ago by the Philippine military.
Dalawa naman ang tama niya. Yun lang.
They shot her twice, her elbow and her head. Her ear was intact, but this was shattered.
They live in an area the military believes is overrun by communist militants belonging to the New People's Army, or the NPA. Considered terrorists by the government, the 10,000-strong NPA has been waging a 37-year insurgency and is seen as the largest threat to national security.
They keep insisting my child was a member of the NPA. I've told them it's not true.
Suspected of being a child warrior, Grecil is one of the youngest names added to a growing list of victims of political killings.
In the harshest possible terms, I condemn political killings.
A statement President Arroyo has made repeatedly. But since she came to power in 2001, leftist groups say more than 700 people have been murdered for political reasons. The government says victims number less than 200. Most of them members of the left and journalists. Bowing to pressure from concerned groups, the government set up an investigating panel earlier this year and welcomed observers from the international community. Initial findings were similar, and at the end of his investigation, the UN Special Rapporteur used strong words against the Armed Forces of the Philippines, or the AFP.
The AFP remains in a state of almost total denial, and that can be seen from its official response to the Mello report. It's in denial of its need to respond effectively and authentically to the significant number of killings, which in my view have been convincingly attributed to them.
This man spent years as the commanding officer of the army in NPA-ridden areas. He says his mission was to exterminate enemies of the state. While he was in charge, scores of people were killed in his areas of responsibility. The now retired Major General is known here as the Butcher.
Have you ever, you've been accused of this, but have you ever, sir, ordered the killing of a communist insurgent or somebody who you considered an enemy of the state?
I ordered the killing. I ordered them to conduct operations, actually, against these people. But killing civilians, unarmed civilians, I think is a no-no. Our job is actually to go after the enemies. So if they declare themselves as enemies, then they are our enemies, perhaps. But we do it within what is allowed of us. So you cannot count on us to stop these killings because, as I said, we do not admit that we are the ones killing.
Major General Palparan insists the stories against him are communist propaganda and that there is now peace in his former areas of control. But 26-year-old Lenny tells a different story. She works with a farmers group, but the government believes she is part of the communist insurgency.
8 armed men, some in camouflage, some in combat shoes, others in civilian clothing, climbed our wall. Suddenly, one of the men approached my mother and put a gun to her face. "Open the door," he said, "or I will kill you." They ripped everything apart.
When the men failed to find her, they abducted her brother, saying they would hold him until she surrenders. But the military denies this.
Well, we have what I call the coercive power of the state. That's why we have the police and the military. To coerce, of course, people to behave properly, and those who are planning something bad against anyone and against the institutions must desist.
In March, communist leader and Congressman Saturo Campo was arrested, accused of multiple murder. The military says he ordered a purge of communist ranks in the 80s. This mass grave was uncovered 6 months ago and believed to contain victims' remains. The government says the communists are purging their ranks again and are behind the current killings.
This is all, a political show. In a way, it's a circus. This is all spurious, this is all ridiculous, but that's about all. That's about the sums up the allegations of government.
Local elections are 2 weeks away, and polls show opposition candidates in the lead. Despite President Arroyo saying everything possible is being done, mothers continue to grieve for their sons, and more people are living in hiding in a democratic country.
Pangarap naman namin, pag malutas tong kaso,
If we sort this case out, if we get by, I plan to go home and work again, in peace. I don't want the military there anymore. I don't want the NPA. That's all I want when this is over.
Gregorio is now having to fight for justice and a peaceful future for his children. Basic rights for any human being.
I'm joined now in our studio by the Philippines Congressman Teodoro Locsin and by Melinda De Jesus from the Center for Media Freedom and Responsibility. And also from Manila, we're joined by Raul Gonzalez, who is the Philippines Secretary of Justice. Secretary Gonzalez, if I may begin with you, there is consistently from almost every quarter within and outside of the Philippines a recurring charge that I'm hearing, and that is that there is a culture of rampant lawlessness in the country. What's your response to that?
There is rampant lawlessness because the New People's Army have not stopped fighting the government, notwithstanding government offers for a ceasefire. Every time the government offers ceasefire, they reject it, and then they continue attacking military camps.
The accusation is not against insurgents. The accusation is that there is no law that is being followed by the government, that the police and the military are themselves outside of the existing structure of the law.
That is ridiculous because the government follows the law. As a matter of fact, we bow to every decision of the Supreme Court.
Philip Alston from the UNHCR, whom we heard from just a moment ago, said the vital flaw which undermines the utility of much of the judicial system is the problem of virtual impunity that prevails.
That is not correct also. That is Mr. Alsop's conclusion. He has been here for less than 1 week and he became an expert in my country.
So you're saying that Mr. Alston,
from the very start when he came here.
You're saying that Mr. Alston, the Mello report, the Human Rights Commissions, the number of them that have complained about lawlessness in the Philippines, none of these have any basis in fact.
I do not agree with you on that because the Philippine Human Rights Commission acquitted General Palparan. And we are the only country with a human rights provision in our constitution.
All right. Let me stop you there if I could, Mr. Secretary.
Report.
Let me stop you there if I could and come to Teodoro Locsin.
Yes.
You are a member of the
Congress,
current Congress. You've heard there from the Secretary that there is absolutely no basis in fact for any of these accusations. And yet, as I say, there is a vast body of criticism and evidence that suggests there is a major problem. What do you say?
There is a basis. The basis is the Mello report. The conclusion of the Mello report, which is sanctioned by the President no less, is that General Palparan has actively encouraged military elements to take the law into their own hands. He has created a category of enemies of the state. Nowhere in the law of the Philippines, the United States, or even Great Britain is there such a category as enemies of the state. He has called people enemies of the state. He has judged them to be guilty of being enemies of the state and then apparently allows soldiers to execute the sentence.
There was an interesting comment he made in that film we just showed, in which he said to coerce people to behave properly, and those that are planning something bad against anyone, is what his job consists of.
Right.
The implication that coercion, the use of force to behave properly, is somehow an adequate explanation.
No, the problem is you take soldiers who are trained to do tactical tasks, and you give them words like coercive power of the state, and they think the coercive power of the state is a general license to do what they want. It's not. The coercive power of the state can only follow a specific law. And there is no law in the Philippines that says it is a crime to be a communist. It is a crime to advocate communism. And that once declared an enemy of the state, simply by the decision of a military man, you should be killed. In fact, we have no death penalty.
Secretary Gonzalez, let me come back to you. Major General Palparan has been, throughout his military career, promoted within the military. He's been given the Distinguished Service Star Medal for his activities, and yet in the areas in which he operates, he's been known as the executioner and the butcher by the local population. Does that not raise some concerns?
Because in his areas of responsibility are always infested heavily by the New People's Army, which had been called terrorists even in the United States and in Europe. Now, in connection with the Melo report, there is nothing in the Melo report that categorically says what Congressman Locsin said. As a matter of fact, the Melo report is incomplete because the left elements who had been raising questions against the government never cooperated with that Melo commission.
Raul,
the conclusion...
Raul, the Melo report is complete.
Yes.
It is the leftist side that is not included. The rightist side, the military side, is already included. And based just on the rightist side, Justice Melo has said that Palparan has encouraged the assassination of civilians. So you don't need the left. The left will only aggravate the charges.
Let me come to Melinda de Jesus here. The interesting thing is that Secretary Gonzalez is speaking, putting everything in the same framework, and that is that we are under threat from terrorists, from the NPA. That, in fact, only handles a small number or a certain degree of the executions that have gone on. There are people who fall outside of anything that could be classed as terrorists.
Sure. And that's why the database that we have been looking at since early 90s, the journalists, the killings of the journalists are in fact a better illustration of lawlessness, because the range of journalists that have been killed, where cases have gone unpunished, where government has not moved to actually uphold justice, where they have been killed, that more illustrates that there is no rule of law, that the government has actually not acted quickly enough nor with greater resolution to protect freedom of speech, which the Constitution actually very, very strongly upholds.
We're going to have to take a short break. We'll come back and discuss the journalist situation and the Melo report a little more in just a moment.